So, picture this. It's a crisp, clear January day in the Hollywood Hills.
Oh, okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, exactly. You're sitting in this beautiful, sun-drenched living room, right? Overlooking the sprawling San Fernando Valley, and the doorbell rings. In walks this striking young woman carrying an exquisite leather case.
Oh, wow.
Right. She sits down opposite you, snaps on these sterile rubber gloves, and carefully extracts a handcrafted Italian glass syringe.
Naturally.
But she's misplaced her normal medical tourniquet. So she reaches down, literally pulls off her own pink fishnet stocking, and uses it to tie off your right arm.
Oh my God.
I know. The blood oozes up into this spaghetti-shaped tube, and she steadily pushes the contents of the syringe straight into your bloodstream.
I mean, it's an incredibly vivid, almost cinematic scene to open a memoir with. And honestly, if you know anything about the history of the person sitting in that chair, you are immediately bracing yourself for tragedy.
Exactly, yeah.
Because the imagery just screams that we are about to witness, like, another devastating rock star relapse.
Right. That is the immediate assumption. You read that passage and you just think, okay, we're looking at a heroin binge here. But here is the massive twist. She isn't injecting him with China white heroin. The substance going into his arm is ozone.
Ozone, like the gas.
Yes. It's a completely legal medical treatment. And before we go any further, I actually need you to break that down for me, because the idea of injecting a gas into a human vein sounds terrifying. Like, what is the actual mechanism there?
Right. It does sound completely like science fiction. But intravenous ozone therapy essentially involves drawing a portion of the patient's blood and then infusing that blood with ozone, which is, a highly reactive form of oxygen.
Okay.
And then they cycle that superoxygenated blood back into the body. The goal, at least from a medical standpoint, is to create this systemic antiviral and immune boosting response.
Wow.
Yeah. And in this specific case, it was being used as a really aggressive therapy to keep hepatitis C at bay.
A disease he contracted from years of sharing dirty needles during his actual addiction. So today, we are doing a deep dive into some incredibly raw, completely unfiltered source material. It's the memoir, Scar Tissue, by Anthony Kiedis, the frontman of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
It's an intense read.
Oh, absolutely. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore the chaotic, high-stakes origins of a cultural icon. We really want to extract the actual mechanisms of how extreme, boundaryless environments shape creativity and identity and ultimate resilience.
And, regardless of your personal musical tastes, there is just a fascinating psychological case study here for you as a listener.
Completely.
Whether you are, say, an artist trying to find an authentic voice, or an entrepreneur navigating absolute chaos, or honestly, just someone curious about human psychology, this source material offers a masterclass in finding your tribe and somehow channeling unadulterated feral energy into something that changes the world.
So let's start at the beginning, because to understand why a grown man requires intravenous ozone just to maintain his baseline health, we kind of have to look at the radical shift in his childhood environment.
Yeah, we really do.
So Anthony was conceived on a snowy Michigan night between two completely mismatched people. His mother, Peggy, was this loving, relatively conventional woman.
Right.
And his father, Jack Kiedis, was a relentless rebel who had already spent time in jail. Eventually, that marriage dissolves. And Anthony spends his early years in a somewhat normal environment in Michigan. But the pivotal moment, like the inciting incident of this entire story, happens when he's 12 years old.
The big move.
Exactly. He packs up and moves to Los Angeles to live full-time with his father. What kind of environment is a 12-year-old walking into here?
Well, he is walking into an environment completely devoid of traditional gravity. I mean, his father has entirely reinvented himself in Los Angeles. He's shed his old identity, renamed himself Blackie Dammit, and goes by the street name Spider.
Spider, of course.
Right. And Blackie is technically an aspiring actor, but functionally, his primary occupation is drug dealing to the Hollywood elite.
Wow.
So the concept of parental boundaries didn't just blur. They fundamentally did not exist in this household.
Okay, give me a sense of the day-to-day reality there. Because we hear Hollywood drug dealer, but what does that actually look like for middle schooler living in that house?
It looks like this totally bizarre collision of high glamour and deep criminal negligence. For instance, Anthony needed an address to get into a good public school in Westwood, right?
Yeah.
Blackie's solution was to casually use Sonny Bono's Beller address.
You're kidding. Sonny Bono.
Yes. So Anthony ends up attending these star-studded Hollywood parties, and at one point actually gets trapped inside Sonny Bono's carved wood elevator, requiring a fireman's axe to chop him out.
Oh my gosh, that is absurd.
It gets crazier.
Yeah.
Because while Sonny Bono occasionally acted as a conventional surrogate parent, actually teaching the kid basic lessons about not lying and respecting property, Blackie's house was the Wild West. Blackie kept a literal triple beam scale in the back room.
Just out in the open.
Just sitting there. He would openly cut his cocaine with Italian laxative while his 12-year-old son sat there and watched the entire process.
See, I used this analogy when I was reviewing my notes for this deep dive. It reads like an upside-down Leave It to Beaver.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Where Peter Pan lives on the 1970s Sunset Strip and deals quaaludes for a living. I mean, the source material notes that before they would go out to the famous Rainbow Bar and Grill, Blackie would break open Tuinal capsules.
Oh, those heavy, heavy pharmaceutical downers.
Yes. And he would hide the terrible tasting powder inside slices of banana specifically for Anthony to eat. He even orchestrated a scenario where his 12-year-old son lost his virginity to Blackie's own 18-year-old girlfriend.
Yeah, that part is...
It's a lot. And let me push back on this a bit, because it's so easy to just label this as monstrous parenting.
Sure.
Was this pure, unadulterated negligence disguised as freedom? Or was there, in Blackie's warped worldview, some bizarre form of respect? Like, was he treating a 12-year-old exactly like an adult because he thought that was the ultimate form of love?
That is the big question. And the psychology there is incredibly complex. The sources suggest it leans toward the latter, however misguided it was. You know, Blackie viewed himself as an anti-establishment pioneer.
Oh, I see.
He genuinely thought shielding his son from the real world of sex, drugs, and nightlife was doing him a disservice. And what makes this so compelling is Anthony's reaction.
How so?
Well, Anthony was a child desperately searching for a male role model, with his biological father suddenly offering this intoxicating, rule-free lifestyle. Anthony didn't rebel against the chaos. He mirrored it completely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when Blackie decided to dive into character acting and started wearing custom 1930s pinstriped gangster suits with spectator shoes, Anthony went to the exact same custom tailors to get matching miniature suits.
12-year-old in a custom gangster suit.
Exactly. He even adopted a stage name, Cole Dammit, simply to signal to the world that he was the son of Blackie.
He essentially became a miniature 12-year-old mafia enforcer for his dad's Hollywood fantasy.
Functionally, yes. And if we look at the psychological mechanism at play here, this total absence of guardrails forced Anthony to develop hyper-independence and extreme adaptability.
Which makes sense.
Right. I mean, he was navigating adult nightclubs, executing drug deals, and reading the subtle social cues of Hollywood parties before he was even a teenager. But the unseen cost was the complete warping of his baseline for risk.
Yeah, I bet.
When the trusted adults in your life are taking you on cross-country marijuana smuggling runs and you have $30,000 in illicit cash physically taped to your abdomen,
my God,
the standard societal concept of danger loses all meaning. The alarm bells that ring in a normal person's head simply get disconnected.
Okay, so if your baseline for danger is that heavily skewed by the time you're a preteen, what happens when you take that kid and drop him into a normal high school environment? Because a child whose home life is effectively a Sunset Strip nightclub isn't going to find their grounding family at home. They have to build it themselves.
Exactly. And that transition happens at Fairfax High, which Anthony ends up at entirely by accident due to like a school district boundary issue.
Okay.
And this is a crucial psychological pivot in the sources. The moment he steps onto that campus, he decides to claim the more mature name Anthony. He formally drops Tony, which was his Michigan childhood name.
Interesting.
Yeah, he is actively shedding his past and stepping into the role of the alpha. And Fairfax was this incredible cultural melting pot, which provided the perfect stage for him to build a tribe of fellow outsiders.
And the way this tribe forms feels straight out of a movie. So Anthony is walking across the schoolyard and he sees this tiny, frantic-looking kid with a gap tooth holding another kid in what looks like a vicious headlock.
Right.
Anthony, operating on his warped baseline of aggression, marches over and threatens to beat the kid up if he doesn't let go.
Only to find out they were just playing around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that kid with the gap tooth was Michael Bolzery, who the world would eventually know as Flea. And from that initial moment of misdirected aggression, this inseparable bond forms.
It's so fascinating because Flea was a painfully shy jazz trumpet prodigy who was dealing with his own chaotic, difficult home life. So Anthony immediately steps into that alpha role, providing a protective, albeit highly reckless shield for Flea.
And they soon fold in Hillel Slovak, who introduces them to progressive rock and a drummer named Jack Irons.
Right.
And the sources outline a shared rebellion among these four that goes way beyond skipping a few classes. I mean, they create a comedy gang called Lost Faces with these highly stylized characters, and their definition of fun is just terrifying.
Oh, it completely aligns with Anthony's destroyed sense of risk. Their bonding exercises consisted of finding 5-story apartment buildings, climbing up to the roof, and jumping off into the swimming pools below.
5 stories, yeah.
And they wouldn't even check the depth of the water. They taught themselves how to hit the surface and immediately go sideways to avoid breaking their legs.
Oh my God.
They did this constantly until the inevitable happened. Anthony miscalculated his jump, missed the pool by 10 inches, landed directly on the concrete on his heels, and literally flattened his vertebrae.
See, a broken back would be the ultimate wake-up call for any normal group of teenagers.
Yeah.
But they just kept going.
They really did.
They escalate from jumping off roofs to engineering highly coordinated supermarket heists. The book details how Anthony would casually walk the aisles, filling a basket with filet mignon and expensive lobster, set it on the floor by the magazine rack near the exit.
It's so bold.
Right. And Flea would dash in from the street, grab the basket from under the railing, and just vanish. They even pulled off this massive high school prank where they scaled the school marquee at night and rearranged the plastic letters to write an incredibly vulgar insult.
Oh, the Dandy Don Platt sucks anus sign.
Yes, aimed at a strict history teacher who had failed Flea for cheating.
I mean, the behavior is undeniable juvenile delinquency.
And that's exactly my question. Right now, I'm just hearing the rap sheet of 4 feral kids. How do supermarket heists and roof jumping actually lay the psychological groundwork for musical genius?
Well, it really comes down to the mechanics of trust and unspoken communication. What they were forging in those moments wasn't just a criminal record. It was a profound, shared outsider identity.
Okay.
They weren't the rich kids. They weren't the conventionally cool kids. They were the weirdos surviving on the fringe. When you execute a coordinator heist, or when you trust a friend to guide you off a 5-story roof, you are building a neurological shorthand with that person.
It's like a chemical reaction. You take these highly volatile, traumatized teenagers who are harmless or just deeply sad on their own. But when you mix them together under the pressure cooker of 1980s Los Angeles, they combust into something entirely new.
That analogy is spot on. And look at the diverse musical elements they were throwing into that reaction. You have Flea bringing a deep, formal understanding of jazz trumpet, which is entirely based on improvisation and reading the room. You have Hillel's technical mastery of progressive rock guitar. And then you have Anthony, who has absolutely no formal musical training, but is sneaking into clubs like the Starwood to watch hardcore punk bands like Black Flag, soaking up that frenetic, aggressive energy.
It's a crazy mix.
And because they had built this bulletproof trust through their delinquency, they had zero fear of looking foolish in front of each other. That lack of fear is the single biggest hurdle for any artist. They could smash jazz, punk, and funk together simply because nobody in their tribe told them they couldn't.
But the shadow side of that exact same fearlessness is terrifying. I mean, the same energy that allowed them to jump off a roof and invent a new genre of music led them straight into the dark underbelly of Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
And I want to challenge the romanticized tortured artist trope here, because the progression of addiction in these sources is staggering. It feels like the narcotics become the main character and the music is just a side hustle.
Well, the environment Blackie constructed essentially pre-programmed this outcome. When Anthony was introduced to cocaine, his reaction wasn't caution, it was immediate infatuation. And the escalation is rapid. At 14 years old, he's at a house in Malibu with adult acquaintances.
Oh, I remember this part.
They leave a line of white powder on a mirror and explicitly tell him not to touch it.
And because he's a 14-year-old with zero impulse control, the second they leave the room, he snorts it. He thought it was cocaine. It was actually China white heroin.
Which is wild because most people would be violently ill or terrified by that accidental exposure. But Anthony's physiological reaction was pure bliss. He noted that he didn't feel jittery or sick. He felt like he was floating in a dream. That set the hook.
And the anecdotes from this era swing wildly between tragic and strangely comical. We read about Flea working at an animal hospital and bringing home pockets full of colorful dog and cat medication. They arrange these animal pills on a mantelpiece, like a decorative Japanese rock garden, and during a house party, people just start eating the dog pills by the handful. Or you have Anthony slipping into full-blown cocaine psychosis, hallucinating an intruder in his house, and his solution is to climb onto his own roof holding a heavy car tire.
Just waiting to drop it.
Yes, waiting to drop it on the imaginary burglar like a cartoon anvil trap. He learns to scam pharmacies by walking in, playing the role of a desperate diabetic asking for insulin, and then casually requesting a pack of microfine syringes to go with it.
The lengths he went to.
He's sleeping in a 62 T-Bird, or crashing in a loft with a guy who literally had the words "metal kneecap factory" tattooed on his legs. It begs the question. You have this concept in the sources that Kiedis calls the deep kick. He claims they were searching for this ultimate artistic high. But isn't the deep kick just a pretentious, romanticized excuse for basic teenage peer pressure and severe drug addiction? Like, did the drugs actually fuel the creativity, or were they actively destroying it?
If we strip away the romance and look at it strictly functionally, the deep kick was a genuine psychological drive, but the drugs were the absolute worst vehicle for it. From his childhood, Anthony was conditioned to seek total immersion in the present moment, that rush of absolute, undeniable feeling.
Right.
Narcotics provided a cheap, immediate chemical shortcut to that state.
A counterfeit flow state.
Precisely, a counterfeit flow state. Now, when you take that fearless pursuit of the present moment and put it on a stage, it translates into an explosive, mesmerizing presence. It creates undeniable art because there is absolutely no filter between the emotion and the audience.
That makes sense.
However, the sources show a brutal biological reality. It is entirely unsustainable. The mechanical cycle of the addiction was that the extreme cocaine binges would inevitably lead to horrific, demonic come-downs.
Oh, yeah.
And to survive the come-down, they needed the heroin to act as a massive 80-foot pillow to break the psychological fall. It became a runaway train. The drugs did not invent the music. The drugs were a destructive, misguided mechanism for accessing the chaotic energy that their music ultimately tapped into much more purely.
That distinction is critical. They were trying to pick the lock to their own creativity using a sledgehammer. So how do a group of effectively homeless, drug-addicted teenagers actually channel this chaotic, self-destructive energy into something tangible? I mean, it's a miracle they survived long enough to play a show.
It really is. And the actual genesis of their sound was entirely spontaneous. It wasn't born out of a grand business plan. It was literally a favor for a friend.
Right. Their friend Gary Allen asked them to open for his band at a club called the Rhythm Lounge. They aren't even a functioning band at this point. They throw together a joke name. Tony Flo of the Miraculous Masters of Mayhem.
Quite the mouthful.
Yeah. And here's the fascinating part about Anthony. He is not a singer. He's a dancer, a club kid with great energy. But he had been obsessively listening to Grandmaster Flash's track, The Message.
Yes.
He has this epiphany that he doesn't need to possess the vocal range of Freddie Mercury to front a band. He can rhythmically rap a poem.
So he writes a piece called Out in L.A., which is essentially a lyrical, rhythmic tribute to his friends and their wild, chaotic nightlife.
So they get up on this microscopic stage. Flea is high on heroin. Anthony steps out wearing a paisley corduroy robe and a bright orange hunting cap.
The fashion was incredible.
Unbeatable. Jack Irons counts off the tempo. Anthony executes a standing backflip in this tiny, cramped space, and the band simply detonates. The sheer, aggressive, unspoken funk-punk energy literally stuns the sparse crowd into silence. People zombied up to the stage. In that single performance, they realized they possessed the ability to manipulate human energy.
And that realization is the true birth of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They had tapped into something visceral, a direct translation of their chaotic upbringing into a sonic force.
And they lean into that chaos to build their following. They become legendary for outrageous gigs, the most famous being a headlining spot at the Kit Kat strip club.
Oh, the sock gig.
Yes. They wanted to outdo the actual strippers, so they come out for the encore to play a Jimi Hendrix cover, wearing absolutely nothing but long, athletic tube socks over their genitals. It is the ultimate distillation of their entire philosophy. It's like they managed to catch lightning in a bottle, but the bottle is wearing a tube sock.
It was pure shock and awe, driven by that exact same schoolyard fearlessness that allowed them to jump off roofs.
But the universe immediately tests them. They finally score a legitimate record deal with EMI. It is the validation of everything they've survived. And literally, the moment after they secure the deal, Hillel and Jack quit.
Which is just heartbreaking.
They decide to honor a competing record contract they had signed with the original band What Is This? The sources describe Anthony being completely crushed, crying on the couch. His musical soulmates, the guys he stole groceries with, just walked away right at the finish line. Why didn't Anthony and Flea just fold right there? The magic was entirely based on the chemistry of the four of them.
This is where we see the ultimate payoff of their incredibly unconventional survival training. In that moment of absolute despair, Anthony and Flea realized a fundamental truth about their bond. Their underlying commitment wasn't actually to a specific roster of musicians.
What was it to then?
Their commitment was to the energy they had unlocked.
So the band wasn't just a career?
No, it was their survival mechanism. It was their ultimate identity in a world where they had zero traditional safety nets to fall back on. Stopping the music meant succumbing to the abyss of their addictions and their trauma. So instead of folding, they immediately pivot. They recruit a drummer named Cliff Martinez, who was famous in the punk scene for performing with a tampon hanging out of his pants, and a guitarist named Dix Denny. They kept the momentum moving forward purely out of a primal need to survive.
Looking at the arc of this source material, there are some profound takeaways here. We see the absolute life-saving importance of finding your tribe. When your biological environment is chaotic or deeply flawed, the family you actively choose becomes your anchor, even if you were initially just making terrible decisions together.
Very true.
We also see the fascinating double-edged sword of absolute freedom. When you have no boundaries, you have the creative liberty to smash together disparate genres like rap, punk, and funk to invent something entirely new. But without guardrails, you also run the very real risk of accidentally destroying yourself while trying to find out where the ceiling is.
Right. And if you turn that lens onto your own life, you have to examine the environment you've built for yourself. Are you surrounding yourself with a tribe that challenges your conventional thinking? Are you brave enough to take the diverse, seemingly contradictory genres of thought in your own work or life and mix them together?
It's a great question.
The massive success of the Red Hot Chili Peppers didn't come from studying a corporate blueprint. It came from authentically and fearlessly reflecting the chaotic melting pot world they inhabited.
But that level of authenticity and boundary pushing came with a massive, almost fatal physical and spiritual price tag, which leaves us with a final lingering question to mull over. Considering how we opened this deep dive with Anthony Kiedis sitting in a living room, requiring intravenous ozone injections just to repair the deep cellular damage inflicted during this era, it forces us to wonder. Is it actually possible to achieve that level of revolutionary, barrier-breaking art without standing quite so dangerously close to the edge of the abyss?